The South Central Kentucky Cultural Center and the Barren County Historical Society are pleased to co-host Speaker Tommy Jackson tonight. He will present the results of his research regarding Jewish merchants of Barren County from 1863 forward, and share about several other immigrant merchants who came to this area. Due to issues surrounding COVID-19, the EPB is filming this presentation with only a few observers in attendance. The program will then be aired on local stations of the EPB and the SCRTC to see and enjoy in the comfort of your own home. Everyone will have the best seat in the house for this fascinating lesson of our own Barren County heritage. Dates and times that this program will be aired will be posted on the Cultural Center's Facebook page, the Barren County Historical Society's page, and the Glasgow Downtown Business Association's Facebook page. Like all three of these Facebook pages to learn more about your local history, become a member of the Barren County Historical Society, volunteer at the Cultural Center, or help as the Downtown Business Association revitalizes Glasgow's historic downtown. By way of a brief update about the Cultural Center, work has resumed on the third floor. Painting, exhibition creation, lighting, security measures, and more are going on up there. Donations are still needed and being accepted. The Cultural Center has resumed regular business hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 4, and Saturday from 10 to 3. The artwork of Patty Hughes is currently on display in the Snavely Gallery on our second floor. And April 10th to May 15th of 2021, the Cultural Center and the Marywood Weldon Library will be partnering with to present the Smithsonian Traveling Exhibition highlighting changes in rural America in the 20th century. And that title of the Smithsonian exhibit is Crossroads, Changes in Rural America. There will be various programs highlighting our local area related to the topic of rural America during the exhibit time, and they will take place around the community. So mark your calendars and plan to attend during that time. And now sit back and enjoy Tommy Jackson as he shares about Jewish merchants of Barren County from 1863 forward.
Okay. Thank you, Sherry. I'd like to thank Sherry and her staff here at the Cultural Center, and also Marvin Claywell, who's the president of the Barren County Historical Society. Sandy is running the projector, so thank you. And then we have Electric Plant Board here. Casey, I'll get you both.
Cody.
Okay, Cody, I get you boys mixed up, the meat boys. So thank you for being here. So anyway, we're going to be looking at something that I've had a little knowledge about over the years, but probably about a year ago I started digging into finding out who some of these people were. Growing up, I'm interested in local history, and growing up, I heard the name of Raybo, Copel, those names over the years, and didn't know anything about them really. And so a year or so ago I started looking at them, finding out more about who they were, and became amazed at who they were and how many of their people were here in Glasgow and Barren County. And so as I did my research, I discovered from about 1863 up until current, there have been in the 20s of Jewish merchants here in Barren County. And today, I think there's one that I'll talk about. here, but most of them that I want to talk about were back in the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s. We're going to be looking at about three areas here. Actually, the Jewish merchants, we'll discuss them, and then their offspring. Maybe born here and moved away, but just some great stories from their offspring. Going back to 150 years ago, information is a little scarce and it's hard to find a lot of information, but the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, I found out a lot of information about them. So we'll discuss some of those people, and then the last one would be other immigrants here in town, not necessarily Jewish immigrants, but who came here and were merchants locally, and we'll talk about them. We're going to attempt to do, after the presentation, some questions from you all, but also we're going to try something a little different through the Facebook, and there's going to be questions maybe asked there that Marvin's going to take, but we'll have a little time for some questions at the end of the presentation. In the 1890s, there were about 12 Jewish businesses on or around the square, and let me read something that Cecil Good, I refer to this book a lot. I hope all of you have it. If you don't, you can purchase one here, but it's full of history of Barren County heritage, and Cecil Good and Woody Gardner wrote this, I believe, back in the 70s, but they made a comment here I'll read for you. It said, 3 businessmen who deserve mention in the history of Glasgow because of their excellence and the imprint they made upon the time and place are Emanuel Morris, Henry Raybould, and Adolf Rapp, all German Jewish immigrants. These 3 were leaders in molding our community commercial climate in the post-Civil War era. Their influence is still felt today. So those are some names that a lot of you have heard, maybe all of you, but those are the 3 of the leading merchants in Glasgow and Barren County. In the early 1880s to 1990s, most of the immigrants came from Germany. After the Civil War, there were so many businesses in the South that were destroyed. There was about 500,000 casualties in the South in the Civil War. About 250 to 300 were actually died, and then the other 250 or so were casualties. Many of them lost limbs, and so when they came home after the war, a lot of them didn't get back into business because of maybe a financial situation, or maybe just didn't have the desire to get back into business for whatever reason it might be. But the Germans, they knew probably about this. The United States was a new country, fairly new, 100 years old, and things were growing, and they knew about it. So the German immigrants started coming in the early 1880s, some of them prior to that, but they came over here. Most of them were already business people, educated, so when they came and opened up a business, then they could immediately go to work in providing a living for their family. Glasgow wasn't necessarily the only town around that had German immigrants. A lot of people in the South, a lot of businesses in the South had German immigrants. Birmingham had a lot of big group of citizens, German citizens down there, and so there were a lot of German merchants in the South. During 1850 to 1880, there was approximately 200,000 immigrants came to the United States. Again, most of them were from Germany. Then after that, you had from about 1880 to 2000, there was about 1,000,002 people that came here from primarily Eastern Europe, Russia and Poland. And they came here because of religious persecution, famine, a lot of different things, poverty. And so they came through Ellis Island after 1892. Ellis Island opened in 1892. Prior to that, most of the immigrants came through the southern ports of Charleston, Jacksonville, Mobile, New Orleans, and Galveston. So as they came into the United States, they were in the south, and they moved north, and then so they found these locations that a lot of people at the towns did not have merchants, and they stopped and started there. After the 1890s to 2000, a lot of the Russian and Poland immigrants are names that we know: Lepidus, Folks, I remember Billy Folks, the Copel and the Green families. Sloan, Berkey Sloan was another one from Russia. So those came generally after late 1800s, early 1900s. One thing that I've looked at here, a lot of these German immigrants had fires, many fires, 7 or 8 that I found, loss of business or homes, and it seemed like a lot of fires for a certain group of people. I looked, but I didn't find any anti-Semitism at all. So you would think maybe that there was some of that, but I didn't find anything in that. So now then, let's start with Emanuel Morris. And a lot of you may know that name. It's still prevalent today. As we look here, Emanuel came into the United States in 1844 through New Orleans. His family moved to Louisville. He started, this is his building today, is still standing. And if you go around the square, I don't know whether you can read that or not, but up at the top of the building, it's got Morris on it, Morris building. This building was built probably, Sam, you may help me out, in the 1870s, 1880s possibly, but this picture was taken somewhere probably in the 1880s. One of Emanuel's son is this guy here, and this is the daughter. This is one of the younger daughters, Caroline. And if you look over here, this is a slave block. It's where they sold slaves. Now, I don't know when that was taken out, but that was the slave block, and this was about 1880. Sandy, do you have the pack peddler there? Mm-hmm. Okay. Emanuel, he started, any of you heard of the combination pack peddler? That's a new word, but anyway, a lot of the German immigrants were pack peddlers. Didn't have horses. They packed their goods, primarily dry goods, clothing, and this was a pack peddler. This is a way that Emanuel started from New Orleans going north. And we've got another pack peddler there if you. Okay, and this is another pack peddler. He had a wagon, horses, and you see the ladies here buying goods, had kitchenwares and a lot of clothing and things that they sold. So Emanuel Morris, he was probably the first Jewish immigrant to come to this area. He settled in Three Springs up in Hart County in 1847. He was up there a couple of years, very successful. He did very well there. Then he moved over to Randolph in Metcalfe County, and he was over there a few years, and he came to Glasgow in about 1863 and opened the E. Morris Dry Goods and Clothing Store on the southeast corner of the square. That building today is owned by Karen and Gary Carroll, and it's been described as a significant architectural building by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So it is a building that has been here for a long time, and it's a little bit unique. Emmanuel married Marlinda Turner from Cumberland County in about 1953. They had 6 children, and 3 of them died when they were young ages, and then Marlinda, she died in 1863, about the time that Emmanuel opened his store up here. And so he was a young man, about 30 years old, and he purchased his merchandise in Louisville, and he had family there. They knew about his wife passing away, and so they started looking for him a wife. And so anyway, he went to Louisville, and while he was there, they introduced him to a young lady, and she was a teenager, and her name was Henrietta, and so they were married just a couple of weeks later. So he brought Henrietta back to Barren County, and then they set up a household up on the square. Now their home was up just before you get to the Beulah Nunn Park up there. They had a home on the square. They raised 9 children and 3 of previous children that Emmanuel had, so they had about 12 children in that household. That house burned in the 1880s. They moved out on East Main Street, you know, where the historical highway marker is out there, if anyone's seen that referenced Arthur Crock and Joel Cheek. It's a big 3-story house there. The Barren County Board of Education was there at one time, and I know in Arthur's book he referenced to visiting his last trip to Glasgow. He visited the house out there that he lived in, and the Board of Education was there. So they moved out there and had quite a few acres, and Miss Henrietta, she had a large garden. She ran the household, and she was quite a lady. She helped the family doctor, Dr. Jesse James Jepson, Jepson, in delivering babies, or helped in other areas that treated people. She would go out with Mr. Jepson. If someone out in the county, some lady was delivering a baby, she'd go with it and help there. So she was a nurse that helped there. And the Marsh family was quite active in the community, well thought of. And Mr. Marsh, he was chairman of the physical court for several years. He was chairman of that. Son Edward was the first mayor of Glasgow after they were incorporated. Herman was the first city attorney in Glasgow, his son Herman. And then Lewis, another son, was the chief of the volunteer fire department. So they were very popular in town, involved in a lot of different things. And Mr. Morris was a banker somewhat at that time. Maybe they only had 1 or 2 banks in town, but Mr. Morris, he loaned money primarily to the African American folks, and with no interest. He would loan them money if they needed to do something, and then he was quite popular with the African American community. Emmanuel died in 1893, probably contributed to somewhat of a wound that he received in the Civil War. He served in the Confederate Army, and he was wounded in the Civil War. And so he limped after that all of his life. there's some reference that he owned a business in Louisville. When he died, he was described as the wealthiest man in Barren County. His estate was something in the $400,000 range, which today equivalates to $6 million. So at that time, someone to have that much money was quite wealthy. He and his wife are interned in the Temple Cemetery in Louisville, and several of their family members are also interned there. Several are interned, there's 4 interned here in Glasgow Municipal Cemetery. One of the sons, as I mentioned, Edward Morris, he was the first mayor of Glasgow after incorporated. He later moved to Seattle, Washington, and he passed away out there. Another son that I haven't mentioned is Gustavus, or Gus, they called him, Morris. After Mr. Morris died, he and a fellow by the name of James Depp, a local guy, formed Depp and Morris Dry Goods in the same Morris building. And they ran that business for several years. And then the last relative I'll mention is Arthur Kroc. Does anyone here haven't heard of Arthur Kroc? In talking to a lot of local people, never heard of Arthur Kroc. Arthur Kroc, in my opinion, belongs up there with their other native sons of Billy Vaughn, Julian Goodman, General Daugherty. I think Arthur Kroc belongs there. Sam, do you agree with that? He was that important, and very few people in Glasgow, Barren County know about him. He lived with the Morrises until age 6. His mother, Caroline, she became blind about the time of the birth, and she moved back to Chicago with her husband Joseph, and Mr. and Mrs. Miller raised Arthur Kroc here, and he moved up there at age 6 or 7, came back here during the summer, and so he spent a lot of time here. He became a newspaper journalist, primarily with the New York Times. He had over 60 years as a newspaperman. He was in the Washington, D.C. assignment and was known as the Dean of Washington Journalists. He received 3 Pulitzer Prizes, 1935, 38, and 51. He also received the Presidential Medal of Freedom Award, which is quite an honor. He had written 5 books. Here is a book that's called Myself When Young, Growing Up in the 1890s. If you haven't read that, it's got a lot of information in there. There's one here, I think, Sherry, there's one at the library, this is mine. But it talks about growing up in Glasgow. It talks about a lot of the people, the Lessonbury boys, it refers, which would be Robert A.'s dad, Bob, I believe is his name, his brother. Then it talked about some other folks, the Leach boys, but it tells of their life here in Glasgow, and it's really, really interesting. Mr. Kroc knew personally or interviewed 11 U.S. presidents, and he had the ear of many of those presidents when he would go to interview them. He passed away in 1974. He's interned in Washington, D.C. So he's someone that if you Google in, if you haven't read about him, it's quite a story to just see what he's done in his lifetime. The next one is Henry Raybould. Henry Raybould was a German Jewish immigrant. We don't know who all these are, but this is Mr. Raybould. His wife is in this picture, Nellie. Also, everybody heard of Old Rib? Everybody know who Old Rib is? The monument up on the square is Old Rib. Supposedly this guy's physique was used to mold Old Rib in the building down on the corner of South Green and College called Old Rib Building. But that is John Murray. John was the county court clerk here in Barren County. There's a Mr. and Mrs. Locke. It's in the picture. Miss Lease, L-E-A-S-E, and Mr. and Mrs. Charose. So I'm not sure who. I do know who Henry is and John. And but anyway, I don't. First off, that was probably Niagara Falls, but the more we think about it, it's probably Cumberland Falls. We don't know for sure, but it does look big enough to be Niagara Falls. Okay, Henry, he came to Glasgow in about 1869 from Burkesville. He was over there for a period of time. He had many businesses here in town. He started out as a baker and a candy maker. He owned a grocery store. He owned a restaurant. He owned the ice company, and he had a ice house. And besides that, he was a mentor for a number of young Jewish immigrants who came to town. But he opened, started out with his, he lived, this building is where City Hall is today. This is the Rainbow Building. This was rebuilt in about 1901. The building had burnt. A lot of the east side of Glasgow Square had burnt in the 1900 year. And this was rebuilt. He got into the restaurant business because of his bakery and candy making. They lived upstairs in the old building, and they would, citizens would smell the aroma coming out of their windows. So somebody suggested to him, start a restaurant. He did. It became the elite restaurant in Glasgow. There's where the people went on Sunday meals, I guess. But anyway, he had a great business there. And in the 1880s, he came up with an idea that he needed ice. Ernie, did he have any electricity, you think? Probably
no,
not.
but he knew how to build a dam and a spillway.
Okay. So he went out on East Main at South Fork Creek. It crosses over there by Gorman Park. If you go out there today, now how many of you remember the lakes? There were two lakes out there where the ball fields are now and the tennis courts. But there were two lakes there totaling about 5 acres. He built a dam down near the highway. And I think the remnants of it's still there. You can go and see the cement there today. But he built a dam to back up the water, dug the ponds. They were 4 to 5 foot deep. He built water gates in them to turn the water into the lakes in late October, November. Back then, it got cold in November and stayed cold till March, Mitchell. We didn't have to worry about these 80-degree temperatures in December as we do today. But he built those, and when the ice would freeze over, they'd go out there and saw it, ship it down to, he had an ice house down on the corner of Front Street and North Race. And he would bring the ice down there. It was insulated, and they would have ice on into the summer the following year. He sold ice and used it in his restaurant. Don't know about the safety factor, what all he had in that ice, but it could have had bugs and worms and anything else probably, but it worked. He would let the local young people ice skate on those ponds during the winter, so it was a source of recreation for them. And he started the ice company in the 1880s. And the ice company, it was called Glasgow Ice Company, and continued to operate up until probably the 80s or so, Ernie, probably before 90s maybe. But it operated for over 100 years there. Of course, they've got the building that now out there that produce ice with electricity, but but Glasgow Ice Company has been around a long time, and so he had he was very intelligent, evidently, what you read about him. When Mr. Raybould, he built one of the larger houses in Glasgow, 3-story brick home, down on North Race and Water Street, where the tunnel is now. The tunnel wasn't there at that time, but he built a brick house right there on that spot. He also mentored young German immigrants who came to this country, and I'll give you 3 of them here in just a moment. They lived in his house with him, and then they would go out and start their own business and move out. But and I'll talk about them here in a moment. But Theodore Goldhammer was one. Siegel Kaufman was another. Joseph Solomon was another. And so they lived with him. When Mr. Raybould died in 1902, he was so well thought of in the community. Every business in Glasgow closed for his funeral, and so that tells you how well he was thought of, and people honored him by closing during his funeral. He had 4 children. I want to talk about one of them. Is an amazing story about who she met later in life, but her name was Gertrude Raybould. She met a wealthy cattle ranch farmer from Texas by the name of Curran. She married him, and Claude Curran, and but he had a lot of contact with a lot of wealthy people. She picked up on that and became friends with a fellow by the name of Paul Rainey. Anybody ever heard that name? I know Sam had. We talked about it, but Paul Rainey's another guy. Google in sometime and just see what he's done. Anyway, she became friends with Paul Rainey. As a young man in his early 20s, he had inherited, I found 2 amounts, one of $25 million, another one of $40 million. You know which one it was, Sam? But I've read 2 different figures. As a young 20-year-old, inherited that from his father, who was in the coal and coke business in Ohio. And so he inherited that. I calculated $25 million in the early 1900s today, about $750 million. So he had money to do whatever he wanted to, and he did. So he got into a lot of different things. World traveler. He owned a 25,000 acre farm or plantation in Louisiana, 10,000 in Mississippi. I've been by that. They've sold most of the land. House is still standing, but I've been by there in Mississippi. And he owned a large hunting preserve in East Africa, owned 6 banks, had houses all over the world. And but anyway, Geraldine, probably in meeting her, found out about he was a great hunter. He has a film, the first film that was a big game hunting in Africa. He did that, and it's in the Smithsonian today, and the Library of Congress. A lot of his films are up there. But he hunted all kinds of big game. I've seen one picture just recently where over in Africa there was about 10 lions lined up on the ground where they had killed them, and but elephants, giraffes, whatever. And also, he had a large kennel. He had many dogs, hundreds of dogs. His favorite was the Trigg foxhound. Everybody knows where the Trigg came from. Colonel Hayden Trigg here in Glasgow. He developed that strand of dogs. Rainey found out about him. He was going to Africa. He came up here and spent 2 weeks in about 1910 to look at the dogs. He hunted with Colonel Trigg, and when he finished, he purchased 25 foxhounds to take with him to Africa to hunt. And he came back a couple of times later and bought more. And he told that the greatest strand of dogs he had ever had, and that was his favorite dogs, and so they went with him to Africa. During that time, he invited, I'm not sure, some of Geraldine's friends from Barren County to come to Mississippi to hunt. When they were there, he gave them a lot of his trophies, hides and heads. Came back, and correct me, Sam, if I'm wrong, but they wind up in Sam's great-great-grandfather's house in Highsville, the Matthews home. They wind up there in the early 1900s. The house was destroyed sometime later by fire. The only thing that was saved was an elk head. Moose head, I'm sorry, it was a moose head. It was saved, and that was donated later to the Moose Lodge in Bowling Green. So any of you belong to the Moose? Coy, if you're a Moose, you from Bowling Green?
I've been out there.
Okay, so we don't know whether that's still there or not, but anyway, so that's a good story there of who the range was, who Geraldine became friends with. Okay, move that on over. We've got, now here's an ad. It was dated in 1869 from Raybo. Talks about his bakery and restaurant on Green Street. Has fancy candies, cakes, oysters, and sardines. Probably no one ever heard of oysters or sardines back in the 1870s from Glasgow. Very few people. And first-class family grocery. Orders all kinds of cake filled with neatness and dispatch. And it says here that he'll country produce taken in exchange for groceries. So that was one of his ads that he had. Is there another one? That's the only one we had. Okay. The next gentleman is Adolph Rapp. He came to the United States in 1854. Interesting story with him. He and his family and other folks left Germany heading for New York. They was in a tremendous storm. Had to have been some storm, but it blew them off course, and they wind up in Cuba. And so with hardly any water or food left when they got there, they hardly had anything. So they recouped there, and then went on into New Orleans, sailed into New Orleans. They moved north to Louisville, and that's where the family settled. Adolph Rapp and Henry Raybo knew each other there in Louisville, and they trained under a candy maker up there, and both of them learned how to make candy. Adolph, he went to Shelbyville, Kentucky, and Selma, Alabama. Didn't stay there very long, but he wound up in Glasgow, probably because of Mr. Raybo. But he came here, and he opened up he also opened up a bakery, candy store, and a grocery store. That may not have gone over too well, so he got into photography. And today, I've talked here with some of the staff. They think there's at least many hundreds of his photography work here in the museum, and maybe even into the thousands. In this Barren County Heritage, if you have that book, if you open it up about page 7 or 8, you see pictures of about 350 men there. No women, and I don't know whether they didn't recognize women or why there weren't women, but there's not a woman in there. But anyway, Mr. Rapp took all of these pictures, and And he wrote on the bottom of when he compiled that and put it together, he said, some of the substantial men of Glasgow and Barren County, there's 375, and these pictures are dated from 1870 to 1906. So in those pictures, Emmanuel Morris is there, Henry Raybould, Adolph Rapp, Lehman Lazarus, who I'll talk about, the Locks that I showed you there a minute ago, John Murray's in there, Governor Leslie is in there, Judge Bohannon. A lot of you heard of Judge Bohannon, he's in there. So, anyway, Mr. Rapp, he was quite a photographer. He, in 1902, he was invited to exhibit his work in the 1904 World's, I said 1902, it's 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. So he went there and displayed a lot of his work out there. He was highly thought of here in Glasgow, and he married Fanny Glass, who was from Barren County. And some of the Glasses here, I've looked at some of the ancestors and still have ancestors here. They later moved, they were on the square, and over on the northwest corner of the square. Later they moved out to 209 East Main Street, which is Dr. Jones's chiropractor office now. So they lived in that house. And after Mr. Rapp died, Mrs. Rapp continued to do photography work. He also did sketches. You have one there showing the sketch. Okay, right here. Here's some of his sketch work that he did. Amazing on some of the work that he did. But anyway, he's one of the leaders at that time in Glasgow and Barren County. Here are three people that I mentioned there a moment ago of Mr. Raybould mentor. One was Joseph Solomon. He was a German-Jewish immigrant. He came to the United States in 1865. He owned the J. Solomon Dry Goods and Clothing Store. It was on the corner of Main and Green Streets. He later expanded and opened other stores in Kentucky. He had several stores in Jefferson County, Hardin County, and Nelson County. He did quite well, evidently, but he boarded with Mr. Raybould. He's interred in the Temple Cemetery in Louisville. Simon Goodman was another immigrant. He came here to the States with the name of Simon Goodman, Gutmann. He had 3 children. He operated, he changed his name in about 1890. Changed his, where he operated S. Goodman Dealer in Fur and Hides, which was located on East Main Street just before you get to the Plaza Theater. Recently, right behind where that building was, they were excavating for some water lines. They found gobs of horseshoes and mule shoes back there, so we don't know whether he was involved in furrier work or not, but so we kept a couple of them, and so I don't find any indication that he was in there, but he could have been because it was right there where his operation was. Another one is Theodore Goldnammer. He was a Jewish immigrant. He boarded with Mr. Raybould. He owned Theo Goldnammer's Gents Furnishing. It was a men's clothing store located at 21 South Green Street. So I'm not sure where that's located. Somewhere there about where the bank is, I would suspect. He was open in the 1890s to early 1900. He also boarded with Mr. Raybould, and he's interred in Temple Cemetery. Another one was Siegel Kaufman, another German immigrant. He owned S. Kaufman and Company Clothing. Most of these young people were involved in clothing. He was on the east side of the square in the 1880s to 1900s, and didn't have a lot of information on him. Frank Fryer, F-R-I-E, Frei, I'm sorry. He was a German Jewish immigrant. He married a Barren County lady, Annie Smith. He arrived in the United States in 1886. He owned a Frank Fryer restaurant after Raybold's restaurant burnt. He was the elite restaurant at that time, and that restaurant was destroyed by fire in 1913. But his wife was a candy maker in their home over on Leslie Avenue. They lived on Leslie Avenue, and she ran a candy shop out of her store, or out of her house, and they're in turn, both of them in the Glasgow Municipal Cemetery. Samuel Green, does anyone know that name? Samuel Green was a Polish Jewish immigrant. He owned or partnered with a fellow, started out Green and Small, who was Abe Small. He was a Jewish immigrant also, and it later became Green's clothing store on the east side of the square, next door to George A's. And they have one daughter, name of Nancy. Ernie knows where I'm going with this, but Nancy was their only child. She was born in 1916. When she was young, probably she met a young lady, and probably met her through the synagogue in Nashville. They attended synagogue in Nashville, the Greens did, and they met probably a family down there of Russian Jewish immigrants. And at a young age, young teenager, her name was Fanny Rose Shore, also known as Dinah Shore. They had moved, the family had moved from Manchester, where she was born, to Menville, and then on into Nashville, and they opened up a clothing store there. So they probably met at the synagogue there. Barren County, Glasgow, was Dinah's second home. She spent many days here with Nancy Green, and at a young age, she was already singing in public when they met. She came up here and started with the Roy Holmes Orchestra. A lot of you have heard of the Roy Holmes Orchestra. It was a big-time orchestra here in Glasgow, probably 15 or 18 people. Some of the members of that orchestra were Billy Vaughn, Russell Daugherty, Tubby Grissom, who was Billy's brother-in-law, Jimmy Pettigo Pontiac. She played with them in venues all over southern Kentucky and northern Tennessee. Dinah claims to receive her first kiss here in Glasgow on the front porch of Billy Folks down on South Green Street. Anybody know where the Billy Folks home is down there? It's still there. Recently, Michael and Anise Carver Pendleton lived in it. They just sold it, but that was the Billy Folks home. She received her first kiss, according to her, from none other than Jimmy Pettigo. So, anyway, Jimmy claimed that also later. And if you know Jimmy, you got a kick out of that. Also, Charlie Goodman told me that his dad Bobby dated Dinah Shore when she was in Glasgow. So, anyway, when she went to Hollywood, she had the Dinah Shore show, sponsored by Chevrolet. Was it Chevrolet? And she used to occasionally tell, I want to say hello to my best friends, Nancy and John Winlock from Glasgow, Kentucky. I remember seeing the show. I don't remember them saying that, but a lot of people remember them saying that. And of course, John was from the Winlock family out in Hinesville. When Nancy died, she died a few years, 7 years before John did. When John died, he bequested Mitchell the largest donation to Glasgow Baptist Church, they said, up to that time, in honor of Diane, $250,000. One of the members of the finance committee said they tried to keep it quiet, but the congregation found out about it, And the next finance meeting, they were lined up at the door. People wanted to buy buses, remodel, do new pews. Mitchell, you remember that?
I heard that.
Okay. So, but anyway, that's Nancy. That's quite a story. She and Diane. I mentioned Billy Folks. Billy Folks was a Russian Jewish immigrant. He married Sadie Palampus, I believe the way his family was from Hungary. He opened a store on the north side of the square in 1918 called the Folks Economy Store. And he later changed it to just Folks. At that time, it became an upscale ladies shop, didn't they? They specialized in really nice ladies' clothing. And the store was destroyed in 1940 by fire. He rebuilt it. And he was in business over 40 years on the square. Very active in local promoting downtown businesses. He was one of the co-founders of the Glasgow Little League when they got started. He helped start that, and they lived at 714 South Green Street, which that house is still there today. They built that house. They're both interred in Temple Cemetery in Nashville. Philip Koppel. That name ring a bell to anyone? He was a Russian Jewish immigrant. His first wife was Helen Koppel. They had two daughters, Rebecca and Jane. I know Jane graduated from Glasgow High School in 1933. I'm not sure about Rebecca. His second wife was Irene Harden from Monroe County. A lot of you remember Roy Harden. Jerry, you remember had the grocery store out off of Main Street, East Main. Roy, this is Roy's sister, Irene, from Monroe County. They had two daughters, Rachel and Rosemary. Mr. Koppel was involved in a lot of businesses. If you go into George A's, and the mural is up there, if you look there, Koppel's was his first store. It's located just south of where the bank was. You can see the name on the front, Koppel's. His other store was a Red Front department store, which was next door to George A's. And so I'm not sure if those two stores were open at the same time or not. He also owned a garage, farmer's garage. He sold that in 1920 to W.J. Fisher. When the stores closed in Glasgow, he went to Edmonton in the late 1940s and opened up a store, Koppel's on the Square. I've talked to several people over there who remembers him and knew him. He was quite a character, evidently, from some of the stories I've heard that I can't repeat, but he was a character. And so he's interred in Glasgow Municipal Cemetery. I mentioned two of the daughters I'll talk about. Rachel was of the second wife, Rachel Koppel Dare, D-A-R-E. She graduated in 1943 from Glasgow. She had college degrees from Hanover College and University of Illinois. She retired in 2008 at the age of 83, having been a chemistry professor for over 50 years in college. So she was quite an educator. She married Maurice Dare. They had one daughter, Nancy. The other daughter, Rosemary Koppel Brown, she was born in 1935, graduated from Glasgow in 1953. She attended Freed Hardeman College, which is in West Tennessee, Henderson, I believe, Tennessee. She met her future husband, John. He was a farmer's son from that area in West Tennessee. They went on to Auburn University. It was a 2-year college, Freed Hardeman. Went on to Auburn and graduated there. Rosemary taught math for almost 30 years during her career. John became CEO and chairman of Stryker in the late 1940s. He built the first hospital bed, automatic hospital bed, electric, where it raises you up and down. He was the inventor of that bed. We know where he went to from there. Also, I was talking to Jeff Herbert recently. I was telling him this story, and he said, Stryker, he said, I've got a piece of metal in my hip. I think it was hip where he's had replaced, and it's Stryker, same company. And so they sell all kinds of medical supplies. John Brown took that company over in 1976. When he retired in 2009, sales had increased from 17 million to $9 billion, all because of him primarily. It's family owned at that time. Because of what he done, the family rewarded him with stock. This is February of this year. I looked it up on Forbes Financial. This is all public information, so I'm not talking anything that's confidential. But Mr. and Mrs. Brown had a net worth of $4.7 billion, which in the ranking in the United States, in the world, 529th richest people in the world. They set up a family trust several years ago, and they've given away over $100 million to different people. The largest to Auburn University, $57 million, one check, $57 million. Last year, and Miss Roadberry donated $1 million to the Glasgow Independent School System for scholarships in honor of Miss Davis and Miss Smith, in honor of those two, but donated an endowment of $1 million to this school. They have two, they live in Atlanta now. He's in bad health, they're still living. They're about 86 years old. They have two daughters, Janine and Sarah. One is one of the leading attorneys in Atlanta. The other one is an executive with Coca-Cola Company. So their two daughters have done very well. The next one I have is Bernard Lapidus. Okay, I didn't know where Bernard's came from. I thought Emmanuel started that store, but Bernard, his father, started it. Bernard Lapidus was a Russian Jewish immigrant, married Evelyn, also a Russian Jewish. They opened Bernard's here in Glasgow back in the 1930s, over on the northeast corner of the square, the old bank building. Help me, Sam, which bank was it? Over on the...
Referencing.
Okay, it's where Little Kitties. Okay. Okay, now this is Bernard's. This was the second. Over on the corner was where he started out. And they moved over here. This is over on the corner of the square called Bernard's. That was probably looking at the cars in the 40s or 50s.
It says the 40s on the picture.
Okay, so the 1940s. And so Mr. Lapidus, he owned that. He was very active in local clubs. They lived in Bowling Green for a while. He was a member of the Elks, the Scottish Rite Masons, Shriners, and they sold the business to his son Emmanuel. Emmanuel operated out of this store for a while, he and his wife Louise. Then they purchased the Trigg building and remodeled the Trigg building where the Trigg Theater. Brian Pack now has his law office in that facility, but they moved up there in about 1960. And they operated the store there for over 40 years. They closed in 1999. Mr. Lapidus was active. He was a Rotarian, a Mason, Downtown Business Association. Miss Lapidus was active also in the Women's Club and the Girl Scouts of America, Eastern Star, Glasgow Garden Club. They're interned in Fairview Cemetery. They had two daughters, Elaine and Connie. Connie is still living, and she was from the Nom family in Bowling Green. some of you have heard of the Nom family. Ann, you're from Bowling Green. Have you heard of that name? Nom, N-A-H-M. Anyway, Louise's grandfather, Simon Nom, came here from Germany in the 1840s. 5 sons came with him, and the 6th was born in Bowling Green. Louise's father was named Frederick. When they were involved, the Nom family, in wholesale and retail dry goods, clothing, produce, insurance companies, banking companies, a couple of attorneys in the group, but they were considered one of the wealthiest family in Bowling Green. Max Nom, which was Louise's cousin, was when he died in 1958, he was considered the richest man in South Central Kentucky. He was on the Federal Reserve Bank board for many years, on 2 different, in St. Louis and also in Cincinnati, and was chairman of the board for many years. He was an attorney as well as a banker. He was one of the founders in 1924 of the Mammoth Cave National Park Association, which is still active today. They started to purchase the land for Mammoth Cave National Park. He was one of the leaders in doing that. Max and his wife, Sunshine, had 1 daughter, Emily, E-M-N-I-E, was quite a free spirit and jet setter. At a young age, when she graduated from college, she went to New York as a reporter for the New York Times. While there, she wrote several books. She was an artist. In her autobiography, she claims to have been proposed to 26 times. Quite a gal, honey. And anyway,
I didn't know.
you didn't know her, right? And she turned them all down. The 27th, she struck oil. She met a young man that proposed to her. His grandfather was named Marcus Goldman, a German Jewish immigrant. His father was Samuel Sachs of the bank Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs Bank, investment bank, was the largest bank in the world for many, many, many years. She married into that family. She was sort of roustabout and an embarrassment to the family. After about 15, 18 years, Walter, her husband, wanted out of the marriage. So he filed suit against marriage and said there's no one else involved, said I just want to get out of my marriage. So he did. He got out of it. 10 days later, he had married a movie star. So anyway, so he didn't wait long. I guess he had all he needed from him. But that's quite a story with them. Another German Jewish family we don't know a lot about, and I'm not sure that anybody here had ever met him, Alvin Handmacher. Everybody remembers Handmacher, Vogel. He was a Jewish parents in Chicago. His dad started a ladies' suit company manufacturing in the 1880s. Alvin went out on his own in the 1930s. He went to New York on 7th Avenue, met a guy by the name of Irving Vogel. So they started a company called Handmacher Vogel. And they produced upscale lady suits, the largest manufacturer of upscale lady suits in the United States at that time. They had 6 plants in the United States, 3 of them being in Kentucky. Had one in Louisville, Lebanon, and Glasgow. When it came to Glasgow, they trained down on Front Street for just a short period of time in a building down there. They built a building which is now housing Houchins Market and Ely Drugs. That building, they operated there for probably 20 years. Outgrew it, went out on the bypass and built another one where Ralphie's is located today. But they were here for many years, probably at the top of their employment. They had about 250 people that worked for them. It was sold, and Country Miss opened up later, so then maybe another company later. Some of the people involved with the local operation, Herman Heller, I don't know if any of you remember that name or not. Herman Heller was a Jewish businessman. He came to Glasgow and managed the facility. He came here in about 1948 and 9. He built one of the larger houses in Norris Court. I'm not sure which one it is, but and he was very active in the community. Another gentleman who came here from New York, he was a Jewish businessman, Myron Harris. Myron and Eve, his wife, came here in the late 1940s, and he had a management position with Hanmacher Vogel. He was later associated with Glasgow Manufacturing. Myron and Eve still have 3 sons who lives here, and I saw one yesterday, Terry, playing golf. Richard, Tim, and Terry, a lot of you know, that's sons of the Harrises. Another name that we all know, Elaine Lepidus Sloan. Elaine died a few years ago. She was daughter of Emmanuel and Louise. She attended college at Vanderbilt University and received her degree in nursing down there. We'll talk about her husband, Berkey, here in a moment, but Elaine took over Bernard's after her father had died and her mother was sick, and ran the store for a few years until it closed. Closed in 1999, and it continuously operated for about 65 years. Bernard's did. Connie, her sister, is still living, and Stephen, Elaine and Berkey's son, still lives here, and I talk to him frequently, and so he lives here in Glasgow. I think I'm pronouncing this right. Notman Samovic. Berkey's, or Chappie, is that right?
Slomovic, I believe.
Slomovic. Anybody ever heard that name?
Yep.
Okay, that is Berkey Sloan. He was born in a concentration camp. He's a Holocaust survivor, was. His family lived in Siberia. They were loaded on the train and sent to a concentration camp, the family. Berkey's mother and dad and brother. Berkey was born in the concentration camp. When they arrived there, the dad disappeared and they never knew what happened to him. They tried to find out over the years, but they never could find out. His son Max died of starvation in the concentration camp. Part of the time they were at Auschwitz. The mother was protected by the guards. She cooked them meals, particularly baked them bread, and because of that they protected her and Berkey. And so after being released, the mother and family came to the United States in about 1949. He couldn't come because he had a foot injury, and they wouldn't allow him to come over. He came over in 1950 into Ellis Island and was working in Nashville. He went to Nashville where his family was. When the Vietnam War started, he wanted to volunteer. He volunteered and joined the Marines. They couldn't pronounce his name, so he changed it to Berkey Sloan. Stephen doesn't know where Berkey Sloan came from, but that's where he changed his name to, so we all knew him as Berkey Sloan. After the war, he went back to Nashville and started again working in the clothing industry down there. And being a young man, he went to the local Jewish delicatessen. He knew the proprietor there. Said, "Do you know any single Jewish ladies I could call?" He gave him a list of several. And so story goes that Berkey tried the first two named on the list, and they didn't respond. The third one he called was a nursing student at Vanderbilt from Glasgow, Kentucky, the name of Elaine Lapidus. They met, and he got a date with her. They both liked each other. Went on the second date. Berkey proposed to her on the second date. So she told him to slow up, you're moving too fast. So he did. They were later married. I don't know how much later, but anyway, that's what Stephen, he told me. And so she became a nurse, came back to Glasgow. Berkey came back, went to work for his father and mother-in-law in Bernard's. Now, a lot of you traded at Bernard's. If you remember, they told a story, and Stephen said, yeah, that was about right. Because I asked him, I said, they always said Emmanuel was gruffy and blunt to people, and it'd make them mad. He said, yeah, that's Granddad. And but then they'd start to leave, but Berkey would head them off at the front door. Berkey was, very friendly guy, liked everybody, and Berkey would catch them and get them back into the store. Stephen said, I think that's right. Said Grandpa would run them off, but Berkey would bring them back. And but anyway, they wound up being there for many, many years. Another one that I'll mention, and you may have seen him around town with his skull hat on, Rabbi Joseph Kaplan. Anybody remember? Okay, Terry has seen him, and I've seen him in the bank when I was working many times. I talked to him this morning. He works for a company called Employer Orthodox Union out of Philadelphia. He has worked in the Glasgow Spray Dry, then Glasgow Dairy Products, and now Bluegrass Ingredients. They just sold out recently. But he certifies the products being kosher and the equipment. He's been there for 19 years. He's lived here part-time for 19 years. He works about 4 days a week, goes back to his home in Pittsburgh. That's where he lived. But when I called him to talk to him, he said, well, come on down and talk to me. And he said, I want to answer your first question before you ask it. I said, okay, go ahead. He said, no, we don't bless the food. And so anyway, he said, we just certify it being kosher, being clean, and all the equipment being clean, but we don't bless the food. Said everybody, all of you Gentiles thinks that's what we do. And so he's a really nice guy to talk to. So anyway, he's still here, and you've been here about 19 years. Let me switch gears, and we'll wind up here in a moment. Other immigrants who came to Glasgow and has made a difference. James Baptiste Delvaux. Anybody know that name? Delvaux Jewelers. He was a French immigrant, came to Glasgow in 1869. He owned the J.B. Delvaux Silver and Watch Shop on the north side of the square. He married Lily Dickinson. They had 2 children, Thomas Childs Delvaux and Jenny Delvaux Greer, who married Paul Greer. The Greers had 1 child, Delvaux Greer. All 3 of those people, Delvaux Greer, TC as we call him, and then James, operated Delvaux Jewelry for close to 100 years. When Delvaux retired, probably in the 1870s or so, 60s or 70s, he sold the equipment and inventory to the National Store. So it operated out of the National Store under their name. They all lived in the Dickerson Greer house down on East Main Street, which is currently owned by Sherry Vaughn, doing business as Main Street Bed and Breakfast. So that was an ongoing jeweler store that a lot of people utilize. Anybody know Italo Petticini? My little buddy. Italo is an Italian immigrant. He came to the United States in 1957. He was dating Grace when he came here. She couldn't come for various reasons. They became engaged. She didn't come to the United States till 1963. Now, he went back a few times, but they went 6 years of being engaged before she could come to the United States. So he started in Kansas City as a clothing cutter. He started in manufacturing, then he moved to Horse Cave and on to Glasgow in 1977. He worked for Handmacher, also for Country Miss, and he and Grace have been very active in the community, a lot of different things. And they have 3 children, Angelo, Giovanna, and Roberta. Fine family. They none of the kids live here now, but they were immigrants from Italy. Papa and Mama St. Charles. A lot of us knew the St. Charles. Anthony and Augustine. Now there's some not dispute, but the information, the family said that Papa always said he was born on a boat coming to the United States. He's got a birth certificate said he was born in Cincinnati. So, but they said he always said he was born on the boat. But anyway, it was quite a family. They settled in Cincinnati, and Miss St. Charles, let me back up. While he was in Cincinnati, he worked in a machine shop before he married, and a defense plant. He helped deliver lemons with a fella in Cincinnati, a German immigrant by the name of Bernard Kroger. Bernard Kroger later on started Kroger grocery store, which was the largest grocery store for a while. I don't think Walmart, I think, has got them beat now, but Kroger was the biggest grocery store. But Mr. St. Charles worked with him as a young boy, Mr. Kroger in Cincinnati. And anyway, he met a fellow named Salvador Navarro in Cincinnati. He says, I've got a cousin back in Italy. It's in an orphanage over there. Her mother and dad died at a young age, and she's been living in an orphanage. I'd like for you to write her a letter. So he did, and they corresponded backwards and forth. After she grew up and was a teenager, she arranged to come to the United States. So she and her sister came to the United States and landed at Ellis Island. They came through Ellis Island, and so they arranged, but they agreed they were going to get married. So the day they got married, she was 16, he was 20. They hadn't seen each other. Now that was love, Mitchell. And and when they met at the church, was the first time they laid their eyes on each other. So they got married. It was a happy union because they wound up, they had 10 children. So they liked each other, I believe. And but anyway, yeah, they settled in Gallatin, Tennessee. Later they moved on into Nashville, but they wind up, he was delivering fruits out into northern Tennessee and southern Kentucky. Here we see him. And anyway, he wound up, they moved to Glasgow. His first stand was a fruit stand located behind what is now U.S. Bank. You remember there used to be a little barber shop between the city building and Citizens Bank. There's where he set up his fruit stand right there. Later, after the war, they opened up the St. Charles Market out on North Race Street, and in a later time they opened up St. Charles Produce over on Sampson Street, and then Annette opened the St. Charles Deli over on Cherry Street, where a lot of us enjoyed. So they had several businesses. Tommy, Mike, Charlie, Annette, Madeline, and Bess all worked in St. Charles Market at some time. And then when they closed in 2004, Tommy, Annette, and Madeline were still working at that time. Papa St. Charles loved music, He played in a little swing band, and he played the drums. He had a music room in his basement up on Cherry Street. He played with Ann Wells, who I know the Snow, Bertie McGuire, and Dr. Christine Snavely. They would play for car groups, or they just enjoyed getting together and playing. And so they both are interned in the Glasgow Municipal Cemetery. The last one I have, quite an interesting story. Also, Lehman Lazarus. Anybody ever know that name? Some of the offspring you're going to know, some of you. But Lehman Lazarus was a German immigrant. He came to the United States in the 1830s and 1840s. Settled out in the Hinesville Park area. He was a large farmer, very successful. Had a dry goods store out there. He did very well with. But probably the thing that he was most proud of, he was an accomplished mule trader. And so he was known as the king of the mule traders here. If you remember, they had court day or mule day, they called it, here on the square. It started back in the 1840s. He was probably involved with that. And that stopped being on the square in the middle 1940s. Now this book says it stopped altogether, but it didn't stop because they moved up on West Main Street behind Planter's Tobacco Warehouse and Wells Tobacco Warehouse. Terry and I attended with her granddad up there many times in the 50s and 60s. So they were still operating. There'd be a huge crowd up there. They would bring mules, horses, dogs in there, leading them with a grass string, guns, knives. They would trade with anything up there. And that went on to in the 60s sometime. And but anyway, it was quite an affair. Let me tell you a quick story about the court day. Julian Goodman was appointed president of NBC in 1966. He called his dad. His dad still worked here on the square, Charlie A. Goodman, and said, I want to tell you some exciting news. I've just been promoted president of NBC. His dad stopped him. He said, well, that's great. You can tell me about it tonight. He said, I'm late to the mule day, and I've got to get on up there. Anyway, so Julian had to call him back that night and tell him about the excitement. But mule day took preference over his son. But anyway, that was exciting time. Now, Mr. Lazarus had 4 children. One was named Harry. Harry moved to Bowling Green. He married one of the Values gals from Hart County. They moved to Bowling Green. He had a son named Harry Jr. Harry Jr. had a son, and in Coy, y'all know the name of Ray Lazarus. Does that name ring a bell? Ray Lazarus, he was a baseball coach at Bowling Green High. He was also a teacher and principal. He retired after 30 years. When he retired, he went to work for Western, Dr. Downing's right-hand man. Ray Lazarus worked there 20 years. So that's part of Lehman Lazarus' offspring. Have one more and I'll finish. Harry Lazarus had a daughter named Mary Jo. She married a fellow by the name of Ed Gens, G-H-E-E-N-S, from Louisville. His family owned a large candy company, huge candy company. He married, they didn't have children. In the late 1920s, Mr. Gens' father and brother bought a huge 20,000 acre land down in Louisiana, right on the Gulf. They were about to lose it. The bank was going to foreclose on them. So Edwin had the ability to go down and save face for his dad, and he bought the land, not knowing what he was going to do with it. In 1938, they struck oil and gas on that. He sold it for an unbelievable amount of money. Didn't have any children. Before he died, several years before he died, Mary Jo and he set up a foundation to give money to churches and schools. This year, I looked it up, the foundation had $156 million in the foundation in Louisville, one of the largest private foundations in Kentucky. And they still making donations to many schools, primarily schools and some churches. He was a Baptist. That's where a lot of the money went, Mitchell. So, anyway, if you pull up Edwin Gins on the Google, it's an interesting story there. They have contributed since it's been open over $132 million to various causes. I'll stop there now. If anyone, two things in the back. I've got more information that I didn't talk about. If anybody wants this, I'll email it to you. There's a sign up back there if you give me your email. Does anybody have any questions at this time? Sure.
Dixon Rapp was an architect in this area for many years.
Yes.
Was he a descendant of Adolph Rapp?
He was. He was a grandson, I believe. Either grandson or great-grandson. Yes. He's in that lineage. Anyone else?
Lived in Allen Park. Dixon lived in Allen Park.
Yeah, but both.
Hospital.
Also in the lineage of Mr. Lazarus was a Gaynor family, Fred Gaynor's dad, and so he came out of that lineage also, Lazarus.
You mentioned Raybold. I remember Raybold Men's Store in Bowling
Yep.
Green.
Yeah.
That had buildings or apartment or something. Somewhere I recall a big building, the Raybold building.
No relationship. I tried to tie them together, but I never could find anything that would do that.
I thought they probably changed the spelling of the name from R-A-U to R-A-B-O-L-D.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, could have. I tried to find something that would connect it, but I never did. Or even when they changed the name.
Rainbow was years in Bowling Green, right there close to the Catholic Theater.
Okay, Marvin, do you have anything? Okay. Does anyone have anything?
Two things, both of them about the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
Philip Copel's, his grave, if you look on the gravestone, it would say, I lived and worked among friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was his epitaph. And on Raybold must have been very fond of arches, because on his building, right in front was an arch,
Mm-hmm.
decorative arch, and some of the windows had arches open as well. And if you look at his tombstone, it has an arch right on top of it.
I've seen many of these graves, and a lot of them are buried there. The Rapps are buried, the Raybolds, the Fries, Copel. A lot of the Marsh children are buried there. Delbo's, St. Charles's, many of them are buried in Glasgow, and it's interesting to go by and look at their tombstones.
Yes, just a sidebar, Berkey Sloan kept the clock at the Glasgow football bench for many years. And that old press box was a problem to get up into.
Mm-hmm.
And Berkey vowed, he put it in his will that it should, he donated so much money for the construction of a new press box, and they built it, and it bears his name, and now they've remodeled it out there, and it still bears Berkey's name, and his son, Stephen, still keeps the clock.
Is that right? Yeah. That's great. Okay, anyone else? Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tommy, for coming. Thank you for being a part of this. we hope to do some more of these in the future, and we'll hopefully we can get back together though without these masks on and do them the way we used to. So thank you all for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Be
Mark.
safe.
Good program.
Have you or a loved one participated in a local event filmed by the Glasgow EPB? Maybe it was a school graduation, Little League championship, or musical performance. These are all events that have recently been professionally captured on video by the EPB to be aired on Channel 6. The EPB archives contain community, school, and church events dating back to 1990 and can be purchased by anyone. DVDs are $13 and would make a great gift for family and friends while preserving a timeless memory of a special moment in one's life. Call to place your order